about 3 weeks to figure out how to execute for a Super Bowl commercial. It's a blip of time, but it's a ton of traffic in just a few minutes. Our particular case, it's a last minute moment where another advertiser dropped out for whatever reason, and we don't get to know what those are or who it was. And so if they drop out, then they offer that opportunity to everybody. They were kind enough to offer it to us, this like young, in the scheme of things, upstart of a startup and a dog food company of all things to come jump in and do it. By the time I was graduating high school in 2000, I was already had a full-blown web development agency. If you find something that you really like doing, stick with it for a long time, even if it sucks, because you'll probably outlast everybody else.
I don't know where to start with you. There's so much to cover. I think maybe from the most recent, I really want to ask you about that Farmer's Dogs Super Bowl commercial. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Very unique situation. You don't expect to get into that moment and to have a Super Bowl commercial or presented to you. For us as a business, we got a very last minute opportunity to go do this. We had about 3 weeks time to figure out how to execute for a Super Bowl commercial when the business itself wasn't expecting to do that. We jumped into it. My acquisition team came to me and said, okay, we're going to do this in 3 weeks. We need to be ready. Here's roughly what the traffic numbers look like for the business and what that means. And as anybody can expect, it's a lot. It's a big number. And that being said, my team was not expecting to build out for those traffic numbers either. So it was basically all hands on deck kind of moment. Everybody tries to basically stop everything they're doing, assess how do we build for that kind of scale. And in a Super Bowl sense, it's a blip of time, but it's a ton of traffic in just a few minutes, right? For us, our ad spot was 60 seconds, which is long. It's either 30 or 60 seconds. We lucked out too that we had it right before the halftime show. So that's right when all the eyeballs are watching and getting ready to see the even bigger show. So it worked out really well in that sense from a placement. Then as a business though, from a technical perspective, we had to figure out how do we manage this kind of throughput and traffic in a very short period of time. Now, most of our infrastructure is AWS. So how do we, one, create the caching mechanisms that we needed to have in place to manage that kind of traffic?
Yeah.
Two, how do we deal with all of our third-party partners that we deal with, like many other businesses? For those that don't know, we're a fresh dog food company, so we ship stuff out all the time. Typically, our throughput's not nearly Super Bowl stuff. It's a very small fraction of it. And so as we are doing that kind of throughput, we have to deal with partners like Stripe for all of our payments. We use a lot of split testing like everybody else does. So we have to talk to our split testing partners, make sure that they can all handle this kind of load at the same time. And then internally, how do we deal with our own internal systems? Which ones can actually deal with this? We're a 10-year-old business. We have 10-year-old business tech debt like everybody else probably does at a certain point. So some of that tech debt's great and some of it's not so good and it's going to bite us. So what we ended up doing and some of the strategy for it, one was make sure our partners can handle the load. Two, which systems can we leave on for the Super Bowl and which ones do we need to like flat out turn off because it's going to overload the entire infrastructure. So we definitely had a minute like that. Then secondarily, how do we help to spread that load and jitter that load over time so that customers naturally won't take down the system themselves or they won't have to deal with slow load times because slow load times, especially in e-commerce, equal fewer sales, fewer lead capture. So it was a bit of that. And then dealing with that was the rough game plan, and doing it inside of 3 weeks' time was also the biggest challenge there. I'm trying to think of what else happened in that moment. No downtime, which is also A-okay in my book.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good problem to have, right? You wake up one day and your problem is, okay, how do I scale the system, make sure it doesn't get overloaded when so many people just show up? So, yeah, right off the bat, good for you. Well done. I'm curious how you land these things, because I imagine they're very competitive, right? Do you apply for this and they come back to you and say, oh, yeah, we like your commercial? How does that work?
It's an interesting process from what I understand. I'm not there in the negotiation table usually when it does happen, but typically with any Super Bowl commercial, you probably need to have had a relationship with whichever TV network. So in the US here, Fox Sports specifically are the ones that deal with the Super Bowl. So as long as you have a relationship and have basically bought other spots throughout the season. And for us in that 2023 American football season, we had bought an ad spot probably every weekend for the entire season. So at least they knew we were consistent or we're on the same playing field as the rest of the advertisers like Budweiser and Cheetos and you name it. So there's a moment like that. For our particular case, it's a last minute moment where another advertiser dropped out for whatever reason, and we don't get to know what those are or who it was. And so if they drop out, then they offer that opportunity to everybody in the pot, basically. Hey, last minute, here's a spot. Now, in a regular football season, you bid for those spots, much like a eBay auction all season. And that's where we start to hear about these like enormous prices to go do a Super Bowl commercial. And it's crazy when you think about it. But that being said, we just got a last minute opportunity and they were kind enough to offer it to us, this like young in the scheme of things, upstart of a startup and a dog food company of all things to come jump in and do it. So it was pretty cool. It's very much a negotiation though, if you want to do it like full, come in and early in the season. And I'm sure the big guys, like the big alcohol companies and food and all of that, they pay up front probably super early in the season would be my guess, but it's interesting.
Yeah, so it makes me think of Rolex versus Patek Philippe. Like, you don't just walk in and buy one. You have to build a relationship and buy other products before you build up to the watch that you actually want.
Much like a Rolex too. If you want to buy one first, or if you're like going to jump in off the street, you probably got to pay even more to do it.
That's also true.
Straight away. So I'd imagine that it goes the same for the Super Bowl. But yeah.
That makes sense. All right, so I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here, but pets.com is like the prime example of what not to do and how to fail in a .com bubble. So then when I saw your company, Farmer's Dog, it sounds very much like pets.com. Can you tell me more about how it started, why you got involved and all of that?
Yeah. The Farmer's Dog is fresh dog food. So it's human grade dog food for dogs. And same kind of food you and I could go to the store, buy and eat ourselves. We pride ourselves on making it that high of a quality. The founders, Brett and Jay, they at one point just realized that their dogs needed this high quality fresh dog food for the longevity of the dog. Decided to make it themselves in New York, and then over 10 years, like I'd mentioned before, had developed this business where they were shipping dog food, fresh food in little packs, they're probably about this big, over to people's homes, and realized they had a business doing that, and slowly expanded over the course of the last 10 years across the US. And we're only in the US right now, but eventually at some point, maybe we'll expand internationally. And that being said, really the focus is just feeding dogs. And there's a huge market when it comes to dog food as a whole. And very few players, not as many. There's probably 5 or 6 other fresh dog food companies now that are similar to what we do. Not the same, but we're definitely the biggest player in that space now. So as far as fresh goes, now there's kibble, which any of us can just go to the pet store and go pick up a bag of dog food. And there's a place for that in the market. Some people just enjoy that and it's the right thing for their dogs. Other people need a more, and this is where we come in, a food that's a higher quality grade food for their dog. And they care. And people love their dogs. Mine is sleeping right over here next to me right now. And so a good quality food has a different effect on how the dog's health goes for the long term, much like humans. If you eat well, you'll hopefully live a lot longer. And if you're a dog, the same is generally true. That's the business in a nutshell. And they've just managed to really focus on that customer promise, right? High quality food, ease of use. We deliver it right to your door and make your life hopefully a whole lot easier, and your dog's life by proxy a lot easier.
Oh, you are blowing my mind. Obviously, that just shows how little I know about dogs and their diets. But the fact that this is a massive business, is that one of the two that you built past the 1 billion valuation?
Yeah, specifically, I can't get into the numbers for Farmer's Dog, but yeah, it's one of the ones that have grown past a billion.
Crazy. Wow. What's the other one?
So the other one is FabFitFun, which is more probably, ironically, not as well known maybe these days, but that's a women's monthly subscription business. And so it's a quarterly box that's shipped out to, it's back when the craze of getting a box was probably much bigger. Again, older company, probably was around for now 8 or 9 years, I want to say. It's interesting. But women have the opportunity every quarter to go in and select different items. Could be cosmetics, jewelry, different fashion items, workout equipment, you name it, odds and ends. And then they have it shipped to their home wherever they are. And so that business was definitely built up to become a multi-billion-dollar business. And that's the one that was definitely a little more challenging to do compared to where I'm at now. But they were at like a few $100 million, I think, when I joined, and well over a few billion by the time I left. And same big promise, delivering e-commerce on a regular basis to people's doors. Very similar experience, ironically, to a Super Bowl commercial every single quarter, because we had millions of customers that would show up every quarter on the exact same day to try and get all the same stuff into their box. And it was actually like probably what prepared me to be able to do a Super Bowl commercial really well versus other experiences that I've had.
Yeah, it all builds up to a Super Bowl commercial eventually. You just need to be patient.
It's funny that worked out the way it did. Yeah, but yeah, really interesting business. Not one that you would expect to be as big or as profitable as it can be.
So what was your role in that? How did you do it?
At FabFitFun, I was the senior director of engineering there. My primary focus at that place was almost entirely like the customer-facing e-commerce experience. When I joined the business, it was a WordPress based, which is wild that they were doing a few $100 million off of WordPress and WooCommerce. And I'm well versed in WordPress and all of that as well. But it's a challenge to continue to scale PHP at that level, especially on AWS and everything else. So that being said, when I got there, the first big promise that we had to do was to move it over to a multi-service architecture. So moving away from WordPress and into Java backend multi-service, and then React on the front end to manage all of the customer experience throughput. And took a bit to get there for sure. At the same time, doing things like multi-region, higher levels of security access, like best practices basically, is what I came to bring and help foster at scale for them. The end result was the site used to have a lot of uptime problems on WordPress, shocker, especially with that much traffic. And we're talking like probably at that point, about 1 million visitors inside of 30, 40 minutes on their quarterly sales, going up to a few million easily with no downtime once we switched over to Java and React. So it was a bigger difference. Typical things that happen at that scale too, caching, the multifaceted different caching mechanisms, and you like leveraging more Lambda services, thinking about things in a more modern sense, as opposed to what WordPress was scoped for originally. So still maintained WordPress at the end, but for the typical thing that you would imagine it to be, which is a blog, not as much of a giant e-commerce platform like that. So especially one that was niche, that had to do these like quarterly subscription boxes, and a lot of special cases were tried to shoehorned into a WooCommerce perspective versus where we went with the multi-service architecture, which meant a scalable solution.
So does it mean that it would be a few million people coming like the first 30 minutes and then basically almost no traffic for the rest of the month? Because if that's a subscription, does it mean that you like set it up once and then just carries on, or do you browse that more?
That's a good question. It's $1 million plus in those quarterly windows, but there's still a traditional e-commerce platform behind it. So the moments we had extra stock or we had special items, we definitely got into the right use case. It's like when you're seasonal moments or holidays, that kind of thing. So there were other smaller sales that happened beyond that. The traffic wasn't nearly as big, but not everybody was fighting for limited resources on the quarterly sales, which is what I think that exclusivity of a small batch of stuff going out every quarter, that's what drove the urgency for people to go buy and hit the site as much as they did. We had customers that would game the system and write their own algorithms and try to hack, basically adding things to their cart. That's how rabid the customers were, which was cool to see. But then on the other side, we probably got like a tenth of the traffic throughout the rest of the quarter. So it just depended on kind of seasonality. So seasons and holidays, certain things would peak it, but not nearly as much as these big quarterly buys that we did. So it was a much different scale time to time. But yeah, very much like running a Super Bowl commercial every single quarter. So it's probably the headspace that you had to be in.
And this is all US based, or is that like an international traffic? Is that all the same times, couple time zones, or is it spread out throughout?
That business at FabFitFun, we had expanded into the UK and partially into China as well too. So ironically, in the beginning, everything was PST, which was crazy. But then as we built up more facilities in the UK, then we started offsetting for their own windows of time to buy, made it better for the customer journey because they didn't have to stay up late to then go do these sales and meet everybody else. But that was also an indicator that there was a market to be had because there were a lot of female customers in the UK that would stay up super late just to go buy stuff and then have a box shipped to them. So it was a market indicator plus what we knew we needed to build as far as dealing with multi-time zone. And we thankfully didn't have to do a whole lot of localization, but a bit, obviously, because we're dealing with UK currency, UK time zones, a little bit of language difference, right? Things do matter, the way that you spell it.
But then as I walk through your extensive list of other things, there's a bunch of other interesting projects that you were involved with. For example, Habit that got acquired. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Habit was a personalized nutrition business that dealt with capturing all of your biomarkers through blood and DNA. And so it was kind of about the same time that crazy, but same time that Theranos happened, for those that don't know, like tricky use of customers' personal biomarkers and data. And so we were coming out at about the exact same time. But the premise was I started at that company when it was in stealth mode and helped basically build the entire engineering team from zero. Senior director there, not the founding CTO or anything, but the person that wrote some of the first lines of code for that business. And then what we did was created a personalization algorithm that took all, I think it was like 300 biomarkers between all of your DNA, your blood, and the personal metrics that you would measure. So like waist circumference, how much you weigh, those kinds of things, right? Mash all of that together through this algorithm and it would spit out exactly what you need from a nutritional stance. And so this is also what leads me to be able to do what I do at the Farmer's Dog. So human nutritional science and canine science are not that far apart. They're different, but there's nuanced needs. So being able to do both of those, help create that algorithm, and then tangentially from the algorithm, we managed to create our own kitchen, which we made very specialized meal plans for people and shipped that food to people. That one managed to ship just on the West Coast of the US. We didn't make it that far to go super big across the country, but it was still just as interesting and a really complex problem to solve. But the premise of, which is what I like with the Farmer's Dog, Habit was a place where you got to actually help people and make an impact on their lives. So that was really important to me. Still is. That's why I'm at the Farmer's Dog too. So it was very cool to do and build and then eventually get acquired.
So with this personal nutrition, I think most people would agree that it sounds like a really good idea. The thing there is that it's a little tricky to demonstrate, to prove that this is working well. How do you demonstrate that? For example, for Habit, what would be your sales pitch? We personalize this. We think that this is going to be better for you, but how do we prove that it's actually working and it's worth your money?
Yeah. So measuring that output is challenging because it's food. The one way that we can do that very quantitatively is to go actually do, and when we did this with customers after probably about 3 to 6 months, depending on their plan, that they would get a second blood measurement kit. So we do another blood draw, a very simple like finger prick, nothing too complex. But a blood draw is a very easy way for us to then start to ascertain like how close or far are they from their goal. And so the problem is two pieces. One is their actual goal in life is X, like whatever that could be. And not everybody is lose weight. Some people it's gain weight, some people it's lose, some people it's maintain, or I have a 10K to go run, or I have XYZ goal. So it's very different for different people. So it's hard to say at point, which is the thing that we were trying to hit, but how close could we get to their goal and help them exceed it, whatever that might be. We do goal setting right in their onboarding experience, or used to. And then as they matriculated through getting the food on a regular basis, at about 3 months' time, you could really understand how close they are to that goal. That's a significant amount of time in terms of body composition and having eaten the food on a regular basis. And it also depended on how often they ate our food versus made their own food. So there was a couple of different ways that we would do that. But the sales pitch ended up looking, we will help you meet your goals and your nutritional goals and your fitness goals through a lot of that work. So that was the easier sell in the beginning. Later, right before we got acquired, we were starting to work on things like type 2 diabetes. And so how do we help regulate diabetes and work on that? We worked in a couple of clinical studies to try and figure that out as well. There's a lot of evidence out in the world that if you eat really well and you have a low glycemic or a low sugar diet, you probably will improve your glucose markers and not be as in a danger zone for a diabetic. Not medical advice, but it's generally what we were seeing. If you eat our food, you probably will do better, but you have to prove it. Especially in the US, the FDA heavily regulates that entire industry. And that was also the time when HIPAA compliance really became a thing as far as protecting customers, like PII and GDPR came out at that point, and CCPA. So learning to deal with all these new privacy laws was probably that business. And that was the most heavily regulated one I'd ever been in.
And how deep does it go when you look at all these biomarkers and your goal might be, I would like to feel less tired, like for example, fatigue management. Can you see that with the biomarkers that are available right now or that were available to Habit? Or is it still a little disconnected? You can do things like losing weight, but feeling less tired might be a little bit too complicated.
Tired is a challenging one as a specific marker. But for other goals, weight loss is very straightforward because normally if your waist circumference is going down, generally speaking, that's an easy measurement to say you yourself can check that every day if your pants are getting looser as time goes on, or if the scale goes down, right? It's easy to see those. But we would also be able to measure from the stance of your LDL cholesterol. If that one tends to go down, your weight is starting to meet an equilibrium with your waist circumference. And then we see that you're starting to meet your weight goals, or weight gain on the other side is the other aspect there. Then if we look at things like tired can be your cortisol levels. So are you stressed out all the time? Are you malnourished? So we would try to look at things like, are your glucose levels spiking and then dropping all the time? Do you not manage glucose very well? With our test structure at that business, we were able to see over about, I think it's like an hour period of time. So forgive me if I'm off for how many years I've been away, but you could see how long it would take for your glucose to recover back to normal, or would it not recover back to normal? And that was also an indicator of poor glucose management, which can actually tire you out too. It just takes longer for your body to do things, and it's more challenging to come back to the rested point, for the lack of a better word. And so we would do a lot of those kinds of things. We got involved in more studies around that. I think we started to focus in on more sports science at first, mostly because it's easier to sell and there's more people out there looking for an immediate benefit that something that's more fitness related can start to solve. But the other ones that are actually longer term and probably more beneficial, like sleep, bowel movements, digestion overall, you think about the entire tract of the human microbiome. Do you have brain fog? How do you handle caffeine? And we would have a team of dietitians that would help customers get to those points. But as a business, that wasn't the huge focus right away. But it's entirely possible for us to do that.
And the Tyrannus story, how did that affect you? Did it scare off the investors? Did it scare off clients? It must have been interesting to be there.
Yeah, that's actually really crazy. It was a bummer at the time. Right as we were getting ready, like preparing our launch, was when Theranos happened. And so there was the big news articles broke. I can't remember who did it, but that happened. And then literally we were supposed to launch that same week. And the FDA was like, no, what are you doing with these little devices? Because that was the issue with Theranos, is they had a way of capturing your blood and using it. The way they didn't even care about HIPAA compliance, all that kind of stuff. It was definitely the tail end of the Wild West of startups. And the FDA was like, what are you doing? Why do you have this device? What does it do? What we had was a very typical sort of finger prick device. We did buy it off the shelf. It's not an unregulated device, but we had to prove that. It stopped all of our launch plans, the timing of that, which I don't know how many launches you've been through, but anytime you're trying to launch something and then you try to time it with the market, what people care about. So it delayed things. We had already started doing HIPAA compliance, but it made it even more important to have it correct and have all the regulations in place, the proper storage, the separation of data concerns. So the infrastructure needed to be validated. They wanted to see that we had a HIPAA compliant infrastructure. So all the certifications had to be there, which thankfully we had. And I think that was just lucky foresight on my part, not by design. I was like, we should probably just do this thing anyway, because everybody seems to care about HIPAA compliance now. But yeah, so it became challenging at that point. I think legal counsel that we had on staff had to actually go to Washington, D.C. and go talk to the FDA and go tell them it's okay.
Kiss some rings and massage it a little.
Yeah. But from an engineering perspective, I think I just got lucky that we had the infrastructure there right away, and it worked out in our favor.
That's so unlucky and so weird. Things like that don't happen very often. And for anybody who has no idea what we're actually talking about here and hasn't Googled that, just go and search for Tyrannus and Elizabeth Holmes, and you'll probably see some news lines about prison and other convictions. So knock yourself out of that. You've had this interest in kind of biomarkers for a while, though. I was curious about the DNA imprints and what that actually means. How you even came up with this idea?
Feels like forever ago now. That was a friend of mine. So I was living in San Diego at the time, which is a huge biotech kind of industry is in San Diego. And I just ironically had sold the last small business that I was running at the time. So I wasn't really doing anything. And my son's other friend in class was in biopharma. And he had shown me this DNA gel blot, which I don't know how much information is about DNA imprints out on the web anymore. So if anybody wants to go look it up, by all means, give it a shot. It's very old now. But the idea there was that you could take these DNA gel blots, very pre-Theranos, very much HIPAA compliance was not a thing then. So you would get in a ton of trouble for doing it the way I did it back then. But we would send out like a cotton swab kit, much like 23andMe does, or they do a spit tube now, but they used to just swab your cheeks for DNA. We built a little kit, sent it out to people, and they would swab their cheeks, and then we would turn their DNA into art that you could frame and put on the wall. It was definitely a bit of a craze at the time, or a short-lived fad of sorts, but people loved getting their DNA printed out and having this representation of specifically who they are to put on their wall. And we got all kinds of interesting requests to do deceased relatives. We had random, we were right next to the San Diego Zoo. For those that don't know, it's a huge zoo, and they do a ton of interesting animal work there. But some of the people who maintain the zoo would come over and be like, can you do a giraffe, or can you do this elephant or this random animal? And because this animal means a ton to this particular caretaker at the zoo, so we want to get them this DNA art of that animal. And so I guess my whole history revolves around something with biotech or dealing with people's DNA and animals. So if I really wrap it all together, it's a long story of doing that. But yeah, started that up from zero, had to build an entire lab in a small building in San Diego, and then figure out how to print the art, how to ship it really well. That was like my first true backed startup where we got money, did the whole thing, and scaled it up quite a bit. Did a lot of interesting events like music awards and Grammys and Oscar parties, things like that, where we would hand out these kits to celebrities way back. And so I got a lot of good media exposure, just got lucky again, right place, the right time. Or I took advantage of my opportunities is the best way to probably put it. And then did that for a few years and ended up selling it off and had a really good opportunity to have it acquired. So I'm okay with that. But it was a fun experience, to say the least.
Do people still do that kind of stuff? Because what I'm picturing is like a QR code or something. What do these things actually look like? How do you represent a DNA?
It would look like, at the time, we used to call it like CSI, which is a TV show about finding criminals and things like that. But they would capture their DNA and put it into a machine. But it basically looks like a lot of dashed lines on a big piece of paper is the best way to put it. So it's like a lot of dashes. And there's gaps between each of those dashes that represent your DNA and what your DNA sequence looks like and how it's represented. So as far as whether people do it anymore, I don't think so. I haven't seen one in like probably at least 20 years. I don't know. It feels like 20 years since I did that almost. But yeah, a while. I haven't seen it. I still have some in the house, ironically, but I haven't seen anybody do it. But everybody still comments and says it's really cool and asks me questions about it when they come over. So that being said, maybe there's interest in it, but it's definitely a more niche business.
And when you're not doing DNA or biomarkers or dog food lately, you also seem to have interest in education, right? And learning versus education. Or was it just a phase?
Yeah. I don't stop learning, I think, and or teaching when I can. But yeah, I'm on a constant learning kick, I'd probably say. So always teaching always teaching myself something new and working on something to better myself and ironically keep up with the technical landscape these days. But sometimes it's leadership. So learning new leadership principles or working on that, since I lead a decent sized team these days. But yeah, wherever I can invest and grow, that's basically how I see it, constantly investing myself.
And I think we've reached now 1995, and the 16-year-old, was that 16-year-old you doing websites and suddenly getting more business than you can handle?
Yeah.
HTML3. Brand new thing.
It was, yeah. So I got a book in 95 that was called the HTML Bible, which was, it's stupid to say it today because it sounds weird, but it was a book that was like probably bigger than a Bible. And it was only about HTML, which is just insane that you take 700 pages to learn about HTML, which you could learn in an afternoon today. But yeah, I read it cover to cover and really quickly, and it like just was, I don't know, spoke to me, and started building websites from there. Just taught myself from that point forward. And I was lucky enough to be in a school in high school where they had a computer lab, like a proper computer lab. And I was able to go, I basically was the nerdy guy that sat in there in all of my free time and coded stuff in HTML. And then when CSS became a thing, started coding in that, or leveraging JavaScript and gosh, Perl. Yeah, back then that was like the new big thing. And I'm probably dating myself with all of this. And then using things like trying to get creative and using Flash websites, which Adobe Flash was
I loved
really
Flash.
big. Yeah. So made a bunch of Flash websites, but quickly realized those don't scale very well. And I think I still have that stuff on a thumb drive somewhere. But so went down that path, built a few websites, and this is probably 96. And some people that I was working for at the time were like, oh, I want to get on this new internet thing. I want to be able to have a business online. And my first customer was a manager I worked for in just a part-time job at a restaurant. And he was like, I have this villa out in France and I want to be able to rent it out online and figure out how to get people to go stay at this villa using the internet. So I guess I built like an early Airbnb, built him a website, built like a contact form, and he was like stoked. And basically he paid me more money than I had ever gotten all year just to build that thing. And I'll pay you as much as these people are paying me to stay here for a week. And so made good money and it didn't take me long to make this website. Probably longer than it would take me now, maybe. I hope so, given how much think I've improved over the years. But that was the catalyst, and then started getting referrals from his friends, and then turned it into more, just stacked it basically into a business. By the time I was graduating high school in 2000, I was already had a full-blown web development agency and started figuring out SEO. And as the search engine world started developing around then, or really developing, and basically did that until I got tired of working for clients all the time, because web development clients have especially back then, I don't think it would be as bad now, but back then they had some very unique requests and needs. And I just remember it being like tiring to do that. But I had a team of people. I had 4 or 5 people working with me at the time, give or take, depending on time. And yeah, I was 18, had a full-blown business, and then got rid of that. Started an SEO agency when SEO became a thing, and started going down that road for a long time. Still love SEO. It's a fun puzzle to solve. And then really stepped away from all of that after a little while too, and went down the route of affiliate marketing and building different web properties that generated revenue. So just a solopreneur mode for a while after that, which was awesome because it was about the time that my son was born. And so it gave me the opportunity to basically be home full time with him and have the time to hang out with him, make plenty of money to take care of my family and I, and trying different things. That was a lot of experimentation, like years and years of experimentation. So never stop learning something. I think I picked up PHP and started going down that sort of server-side route before React. What was React? Angular came out. And
there was the Angular pre-React.
Like pre-React Angular, or pre-Angular 2.0. So like the old clunky stuff.
Yeah, it would be really cool. One day there's going to be a course at university. It'll be like the history of JavaScript frameworks. And it's going to be like in the Angular, the React era, and that era. And people will be making laugh at that.
Yeah, I remember when jQuery came out and everybody was like, oh my God.
It's crazy.
Yeah, this is the new thing. We've got to use it. And
Yeah, but then at some point people turned against jQuery so badly. You'd lose friends over using jQuery. So it's like you would use it in secret and not tell anybody.
It's so true. It used to be a way that we figured out who knew what they were doing and didn't, or in this like a really rudimentary way in like early interviews, like way back when I worked at like pre-Learnist. But yeah, it was very divisive.
Oh, yeah. So there you have it. Ryan's story from jQuery, setting up web pages, and a random manager, not really random, but a manager asking you to build a website for their villa in France, all the way to serving dog food to millions of people in a unicorn and doing commercials at the Super Bowl. That's a crazy story.
Yeah.
What's next for you? What's the next big thing for you?
Keeping up with the farmer's dog for now, for a while. That's probably where I'm at for a bit. Beyond that, working on developing more time to coach and lead other leaders, really. And that's what I spend some of my other free time doing, is working with them. So helping teach people about scale, growth. How do you deal with this, to use the show name, but hockey stick growth that we deal with in this industry? How do you deal with hyperscale? How do you grow teams? That's primarily what I find myself doing off hours from where I'm at the farmer's dog, is coaching people up. So that's
Giving back.
And it's been fulfilling to do too. So get a lot of good time with other leaders, get to know other people, and I like teaching. So it's fun. It's fulfilling.
What advice would you give to others who might be listening to this and thinking, oh, wow, this is pretty impressive stuff? So other than being born in Northern California in the right time, what other advice would you give them?
Yeah, no, I got lucky that I landed in California, in Northern California at that time. I was actually born in Germany, in Heidelberg. But and that being said, I've lived all over the U.S. My father was in the military, which is why I was over there. But the advice I would probably have is, it's cliche, but it's, if you find something that you really like doing, stick with it for a long time, even if it sucks, because you'll probably outlast everybody else that is around you working on this stuff. Just as like a straight career piece, stick with it for a while. Give yourself, I usually tell people, like, give a project or a thing like 1,000 days. If you stick through it for 1,000 days, one, you personally will probably get really good at what you're doing, might even be an expert by the time that you finish it, but also you will have probably outlasted everybody else around you doing it, and it will set you apart from everyone. Even if you're not an expert, you will have done this thing longer than most people have done it. So I try to stay with that kind of mantra, but separately do things that challenge you. Do the hard problems, solve the really hard problems, the ones that people are scared to solve. I've done plenty of those that don't seem like it. Like dog food might not seem that way, but scaling food is much harder than it looks at a surface level, both technically and physically. Or dealing with blood and DNA. That stuff is not something that most people deal with. But I think those talents will become even more useful and relevant as the industry matures, both in health sciences. So with it is probably a lot of discipline. Maybe it's my family's military upbringing, but I'm just generally very disciplined. So I'll stick with something, maybe to a fault, but I'll stick with it for a long time. So I think there's a lot of value in that, and it's good for other people to try it. Same like software engineering as a whole. You can have a super fulfilling career doing that forever. I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. God, I hope not, because I love it.
Oh, so, it's not going to replace us after all?
No.
Damn it. I was already hoping for that island and hammock. You're ruining my day now.
Hopefully not. You'll get there.
There you go. It's been great hanging out with you. I really appreciate that. I like your advice. I think I hear that a lot, and it's easy to put it on the same shelf with other cliches. But as every cliche, there's probably a lot of truth to it. And frankly, I think a lot of people could use a little bit of a military dad or mom in their lives to give them the initial kick, because Damn, it is much harder to set it up later. Good habits starting, that really does help. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming, and I'll see you at the next one.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you so much, Miko.